Today, as I read from Beryl Markham's West with the Night, I'm in the aviation library on the campus of Purdue University. This is the place where industry titans with last names like Lilly, Ross, Goodyear, Bendix, Goodrich decided to donate money to the Purdue Research Foundation so a plane could be built for Amelia Earhart, who was a visiting instructor at Purdue. But today, West with the Night, Beryl talks about destiny. I'd always believed that the important, the exciting changes in one's life took place at some crossroad of the world where people met and built high buildings and traded the things they made and laughed and labored and clung to their whirling civilization like beads on the skirts of a dervish. But Molo was a town in the uplands of Kenya where Beryl moved to build a farm and train racehorses. But Molo was the other end of the dream, the waking end. It was attainable, it was placid, it was dull. What could but commonplace things could follow the meeting of two people on that elevated scrap of earth? How can the course of a life be changed by a word spoken on a dusty road, a pen scratch of a road itself short-lived and feeble against the mountain calloused crust of Africa? Where would a word fall except on the wind? Pegasus and I went along the road one day and met a stranger. He rode no horse. He stood in the dirt track beside an automobile, bogged and powerless, trying with grimy hands to coax the roar of life back to its dead engine. He worked in a welter of sun and grease and sweat, the only moving figure in an uninspired scene of small frustration, but his hands were patient. The man was young and unperturbed. He was not otherwise like any other man bent over the same task. In Africa, people learn to serve each other. They live on credit balances of little favors that they give and may one day ask to be returned. In any country almost empty of men, love thy neighbor is less a pious injunction than a rule for survival. If you meet one in trouble, you stop. Another day, he may stop for you. Can I help? I had dismounted from Pegasus. The pony stood stiff-legged, straining against the reins, eyeing the angular apparition of steel and rubber with fear and distrust. The stranger turned from his tinkering and smiled and shook his head. No, I couldn't help. Engines were moody things. They had to be nursed. He had nursed this one for weeks and was getting used to it. The young man dropped his pliers and sat on his heels. He had intelligent eyes lit gently with humor. He was older than I by 6 or 7 years, but he had the kindness not to show tolerance. I know what you're thinking. The motor car looks silly here. Your horse looks natural. But you can't stop things, you know. One day when roads are built, this whole country will be rumbling with trains and cars, and we'll all get used to it. I don't think I will. The trains I've seen are filthy, and even you can't think much of the motor car. He smiled in agreement. Not really. I've got a little farm near Eldama Ravine. If it ever pays off, I'll get an aeroplane. I flew one in the war and got to like it. In the meantime, the car is something just to keep me busy. When you fly, the young man said, you get a feeling of possession that you couldn't have if you owned all of Africa. You feel that everything you see belongs to you. All the pieces are put together, and the whole is yours. Not that you want it, but because when you're alone in a plane, there's no one to share it. It's there, and it's yours. It makes you feel bigger than you are, closer to being something you've sensed you might be capable of, but never had the courage to seriously imagine. Tom Black is not a name that ever groped for glory in a headline or shouldered other names aside for space to strut in. It can be found in the drier lists of men who figured flights in terms of hours or days instead of column inches. There was fanfare when he and Charles Scott hurled the sleek red Comet across 11,000 miles of the world in 1934. There were other flights that found the public fancy. All these were diversions. If a man has greatness in him, it comes to light, not in one flamboyant hour, but in the ledger of his daily work. I mounted Pegasus and waved goodbye, and behind me heard the tired engine stir to life and sing with a broken voice that had no music in it. And the happy tinker who had revived it again jostled on his dreamy way, wrapped in a nebula of dust. He had been lavish with a stranger. He had left me a word, tossed me a key to a door I never knew was there and had still to find. All the pieces are put together, and the whole is yours. A word grew to a thought to an idea to an act. The change is slow, and the present is a sluggish traveler loafing in the path tomorrow wants to take. Jumbled thoughts, restless thoughts, absurd thoughts. Pull yourself together. Who ever heard of destiny with pliers in his hand?